Hello, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk with Carl Elon. This is your boy Carl Elon with you today, guys, and let's get right into what America is talking about. We need to get right into it. So today's podcast is unique. It's unique. So the title of this podcast is, Did America or did the Democrats miss a chance to challenge the 2024 election results? Something to ponder on. I recently was watching an episode of Roland Martin's Unfiltered, and what I found out in this episode was he had on there a guest who is a part of a regime that has been doing some audits of the 2024 election. And this is great. This is polarizing stuff, guys, because the findings by this group has been just jarring. I mean, I don't know why this is not more widespread that it is. But, I want to preface this by saying no conspiracy theorists about anybody stealing the election, because we went through that with Donald Trump. The election was certified. Donald Trump is the president. So that's what happened. But that doesn't stop us from understanding what could possibly have happened or gone on, and what could happen again in the midterms if people don't take this seriously. So this was a very good podcast that I watched with Roland Martin, and he had the guest on there these are legitimate people. These are legitimate audit people who know about cybersecurity, and they have backgrounds to their credit, and they presented this stuff. And there was even a letter written to the Harris campaign to let them know what they found. And what did they do with that information? I mean, this is jarring. So before I get started, I wanted to go and show you exactly what happened on some of that. So let's just talk about, was there interference in the election? Did we know that there was? Yes, there was, because Merrick Garland and Joe Biden presented that to the American people. Let me read you what I found. Yes, President Biden and Attorney General Merrick Garland announced that there was foreign interference in the 2024 elections. The Biden administration accused Russia of attempting to interfere through a sophisticated influence campaign, which included creating fake news sites to spread Russian propaganda. The Justice Department filed charges against 2 individuals and seized over 24 internet domains used in the campaign. Garland emphasized the seriousness of these actions and the lengths to which Russian governments was willing to go to undermine the democratic process. So Russia very much wanted Donald Trump in office. We all know that because, he has this love affair with Vladimir Putin. We know that, but we don't know why. We really don't know why. So some of this is starting to come all full circle. And as I say, I'm a Christian. I believe that whatever's in the dark, it will soon be put to the light. So something will come out. And again, this is no conspiracy theory. I'm not being all MAGA and saying that they stole the election, but there's some jarring data here, guys, that we should not ignore. And someone, I don't know who we can do now, but since we have the clowns in office, as to how this, we have nobody in the FBI or anybody that's going to take this serious. Don't know how we're going to get this taken care of, but with the midterms coming up and what they have found in this election, it seems like that we need to do something to make sure that the midterms are not compromised. That's what these guys are saying. So let me just play you this CBS newscast that talked about what Merrick Garland had found, and he reported to Joe Biden on what they were trying to do, and they caught this portion of the election interference. So listen to this report.
attempt to influence the 2024 election, with the Department of Justice, the Treasury, and the State Departents all announcing a series of actions, including criminal charges and sanctions. Attorney General Merrick Garland says a state-controlled media outlet is behind a $10 million plot to spread disinformation to garner support for Trump. CBS's Scott McFarland has more from the Justice Department.
Just 2 months before Election Day, the Department of Justice accused Russia of an elaborate, sophisticated propaganda campaign to sway voters. 2 Russian officials with state-controlled RT are charged as part of an alleged scheme to work with a Tennessee company to publish stories favorable to Russia, to splinter Americans, and dampen support for Ukraine. Both officials remain at large overseas.
The American people were informed when a foreign power engages in political activities or seeks to influence public discourse.
The feds also seized 32 internet domains believed to be tools of Russia's disinformation campaign, directed by Vladimir Putin's administration, with a playbook to push polarizing issues, including inflation, job loss for white Americans, privileges for people of color, threats of crime from people of color, and to target an audience of lower and middle class white Americans as supporters of candidate A. Though the court filings don't explicitly identify candidate A, the Attorney General indicated Russia wanted to bolster support for Trump.
Russia's preferences have not changed from the preceding election.
The Department of Justice says Russia pushed out phony news reports to trick readers and viewers into thinking they were reading real articles from the Washington Post or Fox News, but they were not.
Show me your legal authority or get out.
The propagandists targeted social media influencers who have massive followings to spread this misinformation far and wide. Some articles and videos secured millions of views, including on YouTube.
Russia has used the past several years to refine their tactics, to enhance their impact, and identify new ways to reach an American audience to sway the election.
The FBI director warned other nations not to try the same.
Knock it off.
In a statement tonight, the Russian state media company RT responded to this, accusing the Department of Justice of scaremongering. Nora?
Scott McFarland, thank you.
So I wanted to preface it that way, just to let you know that Russia very much wanted Trump to win this election. And guys, you know what? It's so strange though. How do they know what irritates white America? They put all these stories out there about black people going to do this and taking over white, just everything that makes MAGA go crazy. You know what I mean? The racist MAGA for sure. So they put all this stuff and they were able to capture those guys. But some of it got a hold to some of the right-wing podcasters and they spread that crap. So you see why I'm doing this podcast, because there was so much misinformation put out there and bathed in the mind of our people, because, you know, we don't like to do mainstream news anymore. Everybody's getting their news from Facebook and TikTok and everywhere else. So if you are a podcaster or a content creator, be responsible, fact check things, get reputable sources for your information. Don't just put stuff out there that you find without fact checking what you find. So that was a fact that did happen in the election. All right, so before I start playing Roland's video and letting you hear what the guy is saying, I want you to listen to some of the things that kind of had us all thinking they might be cheating. But listen to some of this stuff that could be some evidence of probable or warranted cheating, maybe. Let's listen to these guys.
They would try to put him in prison for a decade just in New York City. So
if he loses, man, what? You're fucked, dude.
I'm fucked. If he loses, I'm fucked.
It does seem that way.
I'm a technologist. I know a lot about computers, and I'm like, the last thing I would do is trust a computer program, because it's just too easy to hack. It's too easy to add just one line.
And he knows those computers better than anybody, all those computers, those vote counting computers. And we ended up winning Pennsylvania like in a landslide, so it was pretty good. It was pretty good. So thank you to Elon.
He said, you know, computers are the greatest. He looked at some that were just shipped in, some of these vote counting computers. He knew it before it even came in the door. He looked like at the back of it, oh, I know that one. I mean, he knows that's how, he knows this stuff better than any.
Then they rigged the election, and now we won, so I'm going to be your president for the Olympics.
You don't have to vote. Don't worry about voting. The voting, we got plenty of votes.
And we'll have it fixed so good you're not going to have to vote.
And I said, we have nothing to hide as Republicans, right? We have nothing to hide.
But look at the data as it comes in from every county in Pennsylvania.
Oh, he can tell us.
Actually, the Sunday before the election, I had the opportunity to meet with Elon Musk at his house for a couple hours to talk about the election. And aren't you all glad he's on our side? And he told me, he said, I can tell you right now, I'm responsible for this. He said, I'm involved in every battleground state, and we're going to win every battleground state. And I am convinced that whatever he did, whatever rocket science thing he did, made a huge difference in this election.
Apparently, Elon created an app, and he knew who won 4 hours before the results. So as the results were coming in, 4 hours before they called it, Dana White told me Elon was like, I'm leaving, it's over, Donald won.
You think it's done?
But never know.
Yeah,
Foreign space acts and quietly just do whatever we want.
I like your laugh. That's a laugh of an honest man. What's your assessment? Did this work? Is he going to win?
Yeah, it is. Not for now. No.
So you're not going to the gulag, it turns out.
Well, not immediately. I mean, maybe in 5 years, I don't know. They might be probably pretty grumpy about this one. But I think I got at least several years before I go to the gulag.
Don't think this is, unless we take this out root and branch now, this could always come up in the future. And I tell people when they first come in, they want to be in leadership roles, do this. I said, listen, they will send you to prison.
We have nothing to hide. Thank you.
They have nothing to hide. All right, so you can say whatever you want to say about they were just joking or whatever it was. It didn't sound good, and Republicans don't care. They don't care. We can tell that right now. So I wanted to play that also because what was Elon doing that was making the battleground states? What was he doing that was so great that was helping the battleground? What was he doing? Can anybody tell us? Nobody knows. I mean, you have our dear Ken Paxton, Attorney General. God, we need him out of office so badly. He standing up there going, I don't know what he did. I don't know what is going on, guys? Are we this dumb that we're going to sit back and let this kind of stuff just go over the top of our heads like nothing? Like nothing? Democrats, guys, we've got to figure this stuff out. So let me tell you exactly, before I played the video for Roland. So this is the theory that these guys are talking about. They did an audit, and every election should have an audit, not a recount, an audit. There's a whole difference. When you do an audit, there's a deep dive into trends and how things work and whatever. And there's comparisons, everything. There's an audit. Not that your numbers match this number to the computer, because there could be some stuff going on with the computer. You never know. So that's why audits are good in any company. So the thing that's going to be the center of this whole interview with Roland Martin is this term, drop-off votes. All right? Keep that in your mind. Drop-off votes. I'll tell you what they are. The term drop-off votes refers to votes cast for a presidential candidate versus the votes cast for a down-ballot candidate of the same party. The term highlights the number of voters who, A, voted for one candidate, such as president, but skipped in voting for one or more candidates, such as lower races like the candidate for Senate or House, or split their ticket by voting for a presidential candidate belonging to one political party and a candidate from a different political party, down ballot. In Clark County, this is where the analysis was done, Clark County, Nevada analysis, the drop-off rate is measured between votes for the presidential race and the Senate race in which incumbent Jackie Rosen, a Democrat, competed against Sam Brown. The drop-off rate is calculated for each party by finding the difference between the number of votes cast for president and the votes cast for senator, then dividing that number by the total number of president's votes for that party. While some drop-off between the president and down ballot is expected, the Smart Elections, a nonpartisan group focused on election security, notes that in the 2024 U.S. presidential election, drop-off rates were very different on the Republican versus the Democratic side. Drop-off rates for the Republican side were very high, whereas the drop-off rate for the Democrat side were quite low or even negative. They also found that the drop-off rate for the Republican presidential candidate tended to be significantly higher in swing state compared to non-swing states, while the Democratic candidate for president ran further behind the Democratic candidate for Senate in swing states compared to non-swing states. This aligns with findings from other independent analysts who examined the voting patterns of similar reasons. So, to put this in a summary of the voting analysis, it is after approximately 250 early voting ballots were processed by a voting machine, a shift is observed in reported voting pattern. Instead of a chaotic expected distribution, the vote percentages start to shift more heavily in Trump's favor. This pattern is not found in election day votes. So what they're trying to say in this whole analysis is there's a wholly different voting pattern in the early election versus voting day. If you're going to vote for Trump, you're going to vote for Trump no matter what. And we all know that Republicans typically don't vote early. Yes, Trump told them to go out and vote early. Yes, he did. He did tell them to vote out early. But the way the numbers are skewed here, guys, it's just crazy. And it makes a lot of sense when you start to look at it. And yes, I know that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did a little survey and she found a few voters that did this and that. That was in her district. But it wasn't this massive when they did the analysis. Do you know what I mean? It still didn't match the massiveness of the difference in the swing state versus her own district. So let's just go to Roland Martin and we'll start. And it's a very long video. It's about 30 minutes. I'm going to be jumping in and out and talking about key points. So we'll let this get started and then you make your own decision on this. You know, as again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist saying that they cheated, but guys, I'll say what everybody was saying on election night. Math ain't mathin'. It isn't. I mean, when you throw a whole group of people off, everybody that's been like doing this for years and everybody's like scratching their head, something is wrong. And then the voting patterns, everybody was just weird. Trump he may have a big following, but he ain't got that big a following. He never has. He's never risen above 50%, guys. And then all of a sudden he's just bam. And I'm sorry. I know that Kamala was a woman and she was a woman of color. And a lot of people probably didn't want to be with that. But I just think that the momentum of her campaign and the way things were going, and she constantly was ahead and they were tied in the head, that this outcome seemed almost weird. And I'll set that on day one. I'm still saying it. But, you know, it's a free and fair election. That's what they said. And they have certified it. Nothing we can do now. But here's Roland Martin on this whole deal. I'm so glad he had this guest. So I am going to also post in this podcast, guys. In this podcast, I will post links to the study that they did, the letter that was written to the Harris campaign, which we don't know what they did with it. It was a list of all these anti-cyber programming types who have a wealth of knowledge and education in their background. And you make your own decision and you tell me what you think. So here we go with Roland, and we'll stop when key points are made and then you'll see. And then you'll also notice that Roland had a roundtable and a couple of people goes, all right, okay, we can't just go for this. They asked questions. Everybody wanted to know. This guy seems like he knows what he's talking about. And then when you think about the numbers, it makes a lot of sense. Here we go.
Pam Bondi announced they were disbanding the unit that specifically is charged with ensuring foreign interference does not impact our elections. Yeah, that's real. Now there are fresh concerns regarding what happened in 2024 presidential election, specifically in Clark County, Nevada. A lot of people were concerned with what was happening there because they were shocked with the Republican turnout in Clark County. They said, hey, significant number of union workers there. It has always been a Democratic stronghold. Now a nonpartisan group called the Election Truth Alliance, or ETA, has wrapped up their independent investigation of voting data from Clark County. They found some unusual patterns that they say could point to, quote, potential vote manipulation. Nathan Taylor, the executive director of the Election Truth Alliance, he joins us right now. So Nathan, just explain to us how y'all define this potential vote manipulation. What did y'all see in terms of these numbers?
Thank you so much for having me. So in terms of what we were looking at in Clark County, Nevada, they published just after the election their vote record, their cast vote record, and that goes down to the tabulation machines and the three types of voting. So mail-in, early vote, and election day. And so what we did is we looked at the statistical distribution of that data, and we compared those three types. And we saw that mail-in, it looks statistically normal. Normal distribution, a bell curve pattern. We saw that election day didn't look very anomalous at first, but then we looked at early voting. And early voting is where a majority of the votes were cast during the election for Clark County, Nevada. And when we looked at it, we actually pulled out the distribution, and we saw it shows statistical evidence of potential manipulation. And what that means is a portion of both candidates' votes look like they could have been changed. And we see that because instead of a bell curve, it comes out more of a Russian tail, as we would call it. And so we delved deeper, and we actually pulled data for Washoe County, Nevada. That's the second most populous location. And a little bit about my background. I work in cybersecurity. I was a 25 Bravo computer tech specialist in the Army Reserves, got my degree in network security, and then commissioned at the Army National Guard. And so I worked data analysis for my normal job before kind of stepping into this role and helping found and run the Election Truth Alliance. And so what was concerning about this election and led us to looking into the actual data was, as you mentioned, 7 swing states kind of popped up after the election, and we thought that was strange, given some of the polls, given some of the other analysis. And when we dove deeper, now we're seeing the potential for the vote counting machines to have been manipulated.
All right, I want to stop right there. And I put up here the definition of a Russian tail. The pattern above shows an inexplicably spiking vote distribution that is statistically unlikely based on a typical human voting behavior. It also resembles a phenomenon referred to as a Russian tail, where an anomalous deviation from normal distribution can be an indicator of unfair elections. They usually pin this term because this is what happens in Russia. Such a spike may indicate election result falsification, particularly if only one candidate appears to benefit. All right? So, more information about voter turnout relative to county precinct and initial analysis may be needed in order to definitely confirm the presence of the phenomenon in Clark County voting results. The Russian tail appeared in elections where Russian election manipulation is suspected. Okay? So I want you to know what that Russian tail means. They pinned it because basically this is what Putin used to get back in office. Like, he manipulated the votes, and they call it the Russian tail. Here we go.
And so the main concern is the type of manipulation we're seeing in Clark County, Nevada. It's not unique to Clark County, Nevada. We've done analysis on other locations. We're looking at Pennsylvania right now. We were looking at Wisconsin. We were looking at Florida. We were looking at Texas and California. And so many of these higher population centers in these states exhibit the same indications at a higher level, and that's a drop-off vote abnormality, where, for example, one party at the presidential level, they get a certain amount of votes. And then you look at the next down ballot for their party, like the senator or the governor or the superintendent, and you find that those lower positions have more votes than the president. And that's very concerning. And that ultimately also led to us diving a little deeper. So we did provide some graphics, but I don't really think we need the graphics just to kind of talk about some of the potential.
That's why a lot of people were asking. They were like, wait a minute, hold up. How did he win? How did Trump win all of the battleground states, but the only two places the Republican candidate won in the Senate was Ohio and Pennsylvania? They lost in Wisconsin. They lost in Michigan. They lost in Nevada. They lost in Arizona. And there was no Senate race on the ballot in North Carolina and in Georgia. And in fact, when you look at North Carolina, Democrats won governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and secretary of state.
And you're probably wondering, why did I make her a carrot? Well, it turns out that Callie actually loves carrots, and I had no idea.
So what is interesting as well is when people talk about candidate Harris at the time and how she performed, right? Talking about popularity and saying, oh, well, people didn't vote for her. She wasn't popular. People were switching their votes at the presidential level and then voting Democrat all the way down. Well, I looked at this as well, and we pulled some of the data for both all the swing states in this election and last election. And we said, how many votes did Harris get in comparison to Biden in those 7 swing states?
And this, just correct me if I'm wrong, this is the graphic you were referencing, right? Swing versus non.
This one, yes. This is a drop-off vote analysis, and this was actually made by Smart Elections, which is another organization that does election integrity and analysis.
Go ahead.
So they published this, and what this is showing is this is some of the swing states versus non-swing states, and it looks very suspect that Harris would underperform consistently across just the swing states, and then outside the swing states, she's almost 1 to 2%, like Trump is.
For instance, in this first graphic right here, it shows that in the swing states, it shows red 752, blue -189. Yet in non-swing states, it shows red 464 and blue 351. That's just a 103,000 vote difference compared to a nearly 900,000 vote difference. And then when we go over to this graphic right here, this is the percentage. So you see an increase. So the way
you read this, if I may.
Go ahead.
Is the 0% is the next down ballot candidate. So in this case, I believe this is senators. So 0% is how many votes that party's senator or whatnot got. So we see in the swing states, Harris got negative 1.48% less votes than the senator across and on average across all 7 swing states. And then Trump got almost 6% more than that senator or that next down ballot candidate. And then outside the swing states, all the other states, we're seeing it look more normal and matching past election trends where you're somewhere between 1 to 2% over the Senate, over the senator or the governor or whatever other races there are. So that's how you read this. That's why it's concerning.
So you're saying that, again, correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying is that if Harris was just so unpopular, then what you would see in swing and non-swing states would be a decrease or people staying at home and not supporting her. But you're saying, wait a minute, how in the hell do you see a plus percentage in non-swing states, but then you see this big negative, as if outside of the 7 battleground states, it was like, yay, we're cool with Harris, but those specific 7 battleground states were like, yeah, we ain't down with her.
I think you highlighted exactly the concern. Why would just the swing states exhibit a pattern? And so that's a huge red flag, because what wins you elections? It's the swing states. And so I actually did the numbers for how Harris compared to Biden from the 2024 election, how many votes she got across all 7 swing states versus what Biden got in 2020. And we find that in 24, Harris exceeded Biden in Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Georgia. I believe those numbers are up to date.
Guys, if we have that graphic, control and pull it up. Go ahead.
I don't believe you have that graphic.
Okay.
And I'll quote some more graphics that I know you do have here in a moment. But this is a good number for you just to kind of show you how the theory that she's unpopular and that's why she would be underperforming doesn't add up. And that's that she got 99.6% of all the votes cast in 2020, the Democratic votes that turned up in 2020 for those 7 swing states. She got 99.6% of them in 24. So it doesn't make sense that she would be underperforming by a large amount in these states, but then get 99.6% of the same votes.
So with that, you believe that something was done to the voting machines? Do you believe that, like, for instance, I've heard people, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and when people, I'm very skeptical when people throw it. I've heard people say, hey, wait a minute, people were using Starlink to transmit the data, the voting data from precincts to the state elections board, and that Starlink, of course, owned by Elon Musk. Of course, Joe Rogan made this famous phrase that Elon Musk created this app that an hour after the polls closed showed, oh, Trump is going to win, I'm going to sleep. And he was like, how did he know? And then, of course, Trump, leading up to the election, was like, hey, don't worry about it. We don't need your votes. We got this. So people are pointing to those things as evidence that something was amiss. So are you saying that you believe that the voting numbers were somehow changed either in the machines or in the transmission to the state elections board?
If we bring up slide 5 here, that's the one that's showing Clark County Election Day voting. And so
is that it right here?
Distribution. Yep, that's exactly it. This is what I was talking about a little earlier, where when we look at the vote record Clark County gave us and published after the election, this is more what you would expect to see when looking at that data. And so there's 2 different colors. One is red and one is blue. Obviously, the blue is the Democrats for presidential race, which would be Harris, and the red is Trump. And so they are overlapped. But when you pull both of them out, they should look like a bell curve. And in this case, for Election Day, they look pretty much like a bell curve. We're not seeing any huge issues.
Is this right here the bell curve?
Exactly what we were seeing, and talk about what would potentially cause this. So comparing this to Election Day, you notice this does not look the same. It's not a more rounded bell curve, a more random and expected distribution. And so what we're seeing, this is Clark County in 24 at the bottom for early voting and 2020 at the top. And you'll notice.
Wow.
Let's look at 2020 first. So if you zoom in just a little bit, the way you read this graph is the x-axis, the bottom axis, that is how many votes the machine counted. And so each of these little dots, there's a red and a blue, and each of them are a machine that counted the votes where you voted. And so in this case, there's a ridiculous amount of votes for early voting. And we see that those tabulators, or those voting machines, in this case, they have, in Clark County, Nevada, they have like polling centers they set up. So you can generally go anywhere. And so what we see is as the amount of votes were cast, the places where there were more votes cast, we see after about, I think for early voting, it's closer to 500-600 votes or so.
So we're going to do this here. We're actually going to switch from my control room to my iPad.
There we go.
So now I'm able to zoom in. Okay, so this is the top one, and this is the bottom one. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. So let's look at the top first, and x-axis is how many votes the machine counted. Each of these is a different machine. Some machines only counted a handful of votes. Some counted 800 plus. And so the left, the y-axis is the percentage of votes. So the higher up you go, the closer the further up and the closer you get to 100%, you win more votes. And so what we saw when we pulled this data and we did this analysis, in 2020, up until about 450 to 500 votes counted by machine or cast at the machines, it looks normal.
Right. So that's
about
that.
500.
Go ahead. Okay. Then 500. All of a sudden, we see a lot of red above 55%.
Right. We see separation.
Okay.
And so what's interesting is if you kind of break this down into the correlation or the trend, as more votes were cast at higher populations, the Republican Party benefited. And so what was weird about this is in 2020. What was weird about this is counterintuitive to how voting patterns normally are. Well, one, you don't generally see a trend as more votes are cast. You just see a better reflection of how people, generally feel.
Okay.
And the problem is Democrats generally benefit at high populations because they live in high populated areas. So this makes very little sense for either of those reasons.
So this is 2024 right here. Above.
This is 2020 at the top.
Yeah, at the top. This is 2020 that we're seeing right here. And this
is 24.
And this is 24. Wow.
So if you use the same concept, we see about from 250 to 300 onwards, that normal distribution just disappears, right? And you see you see aggressive separation.
Right. So this is normal right here. As you said, this is normal. This is normal. Then all of a sudden you see these gaps.
Yes. And so you're not supposed to see separation like this. And when we pull out the distribution, the slide we were looking at before, you can go, I think, two slides or so, you had the bell curve slide. And I'll show you exactly why this is concerning and what this potentially means. So there's a slide with both Harris and Trump, and they have a bell curve overlaid. It's a red and a blue graph. And that's actually that distribution we were just talking about for early voting, but in a different way to analyze it.
All right.
So what we see,
let me find that,
is when we look, instead of the normal bell curve for early voting, we see...
Is this it right here? I want to make sure is this it?
This is election day, and this is great. So This is your other way of looking at it. Notice election day generally fits the bell curve pattern, right?
Right.
Yeah. There's a little bit of weirdness at the top.
Right.
And I can say we looked at Washoe County, which was the other county in Clark County, Nevada, and we do see the same issue, more aggressive for election day there and in 2020. So what we're thinking potentially happened, if you go to the next distribution slide and we look at early voting, but for this type of graph.
This here?
Here, perfect. So this, as I said, when you look at this statistically, and so in the Election Truth Alliance, we have people with experience in statistics, data analysis. We have people with medical and engineer degrees. We have a little bit of everything. And so what we've done is we said, instead of this matching a normal distribution like you would expect to see, it shows potential manipulation. And what's concerning is, if we look at the top one, there's a concept here where if you want to win an election, or in this case, for voting data and distribution, the further right a majority of your votes are, after the 50% mark, you win. That's how you win in this case. And so what we're seeing, specifically in early voting, because it's so aggressive, we're seeing that a portion of the distribution is missing. And so this suggests, since in this case, this is candidate Trump, it suggests that his distribution shows that he's benefiting from potential manipulation. That votes, if you look at the bottom, Harris is missing a portion of hers, and since she's at a lower percentage, we see that skew. And so the way this could indicate is it has a rightward skew, and Trump has a leftward skew. And a leftward skew, or another term, is a Russian tail. And so a Russian tail is a term coined by Russian data scientists and data analysts in reference to a few different potentially manipulated Russian elections. And so they coined the term of a leftward skew, like if you go up, and I believe we also have a reference in this document, but it's if you benefit from potentially moving votes around, you're going to have this leftward skew like we're seeing in Clark County, Nevada for early voting.
Now, what's interesting here, when you I remember. So John Ralston is considered like the preeminent journalist when looking at data, and I remember every day he was tweeting and was shocked at the Republican numbers, and it was like Democrats are in trouble in Clark County. And it was like they're down, and people were like, oh my, I remember there was some culinary worker who had made a comment about, I mean, we were in some serious trouble, and a lot of people, they were just shocked and stunned at the early voting numbers that were coming back. That was giving this indication that Republicans were just going crazy voting in Nevada.
Do you know what eating cucumber can do to your heart? Cucumber is actually a type of fruit, not a vegetable. No.
Election night, you didn't see that. And what you saw is after the first bit of votes came in, it stayed very positive for the Republicans, and it only grew. You didn't see a bounce back. You didn't see a resurgence. And so some people would quote that to see it almost looked algorithmic in the way the votes slowly crept up. And what's concerning is, as you mentioned before, how could you have done this if you could have done this? So I get this a lot, especially with my background. People talk about, our election is secure. Our election isn't hackable. We spent 4 years arguing, everything's good. And so what's funny is when you actually look at our election systems.
All right, I want y'all to really listen to this part here. Our elections are supposed to be secure. Yes, listen to this very much.
It's not that our election systems are secure or they're not. It's that every state runs their own election. We have a few different types of machines, and we have paper trails. And that's how we should be securing our elections. The problem is, let's actually look at how every state runs their elections. All of them have different procedures. There's no standard guideline for how you should do it.
Right.
But even then, they still have checks and balances they take account. The problem is we only really use, for our tabulation machines and our voting machines, we only really have two main brands. And both of them, as we found in the last little bit of our analysis, both of them, I think 70% of the vote counting machines used in the country for elections have had issues of cybersecurity specialists mentioning potential vulnerabilities. And so
first of all,
if you were to manipulate our machines...
First of all, what are those two? You said there are two. Who are they?
I can't say the name of the brands myself.
Okay.
But the top two that you're going to, see, they should be pretty apparent. And as you mentioned, as you asked before, how would you do this? Well, you would, as you said, I think you would do it at the tabulation level. So some states, they have voting machines and then they transfer their votes, or they scan in paper ballots. And the tabulators are what's doing all that work. And so, as I said, there's two main brands. And if you were to compromise those tabulators, you could change the outcome of an election because you could just change votes. And it's that simple. Or you could change the data in transit from the tabulators. Either way would look the same on paper.
Okay.
Any questions or input on that?
So I'm going to go to my panel in a minute with questions. All right. So when you hear Republicans say we need to get away from these machines and go to paper ballots, what do you say?
I don't disagree that paper ballots or a paper trail is good. The problem is we actually have to use them. This election, I think there were 3 substantial audits that I looked at, Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. And all 3 of those audits, in my opinion, were not effective in doing what they needed to do, which was to validate the presidential race. Pennsylvania conducted I believe it was a risk limiting audit for maybe 2%, and they did the Treasury. And they didn't even poll an appropriate amount of Philadelphia, which is like over 10% of their voting population. So it's things like that where if you don't set standards for what would actually catch manipulation, like we're saying potentially happened, and we're seeing indication of with the statistical evidence. And as I said, we're working on Pennsylvania and doing a statistical analysis like this. And I recently posted a video where we're seeing the same trend of as more votes are counted, the Republicans start to lead as if a change was occurring in Philadelphia and in Erie County. And so I think the problem is if you spent 4 years discrediting election integrity, because that's the difference. This is an election denial. This is election integrity.
Right.
It's not that we want to question the results. We want to validate that our machines are accurate, and that's why you should do audits. It's not about anything else. And so these audits were not efficient. These audits did not pass the standards, and they didn't even appropriately audit the races that could have been manipulated.
Did y'all hear that? The audits were not done appropriately. Did you hear this? So I'm almost with the Republicans. We need to go back to paper ballots, because that's probably going to be the most secure. We have to wait a long time, but that's going to probably be the most secure way to keep people from cheating, which is so apparent right here. Something happened, guys. Something happened. Here we go.
And so to hold up, and Georgia and Arizona, they had their own different forms of audits, risk limiting audits, I believe. And I actually looked at those, and other data analysts and statisticians looked at them and said, hey, this isn't matching up either. There's some concerns of, these numbers don't really show. There were some errors in the reporting, and some previously reported numbers didn't match some in numbers, among other things. And so realistically, the way you should deal with our system is you use the machines. The machines are good. And then you immediately conduct audits at any point, and you appropriately sample the population, and you look at the presidential race. You can look at other races too, and you would pretty much quickly see concern. The problem is our system wants recounts. And so if you don't meet a threshold to do a recount automatically, and the candidate doesn't ask for one, it doesn't get done. It doesn't get checked. And so that's the issue we ran into this election.
Questions from the panel. Scott, you first.
Yeah, maybe. I listened to your data. I'm a former state party chair. I've run at least 4 local or presidential elections from the nation's capital, at least on the Democratic side. You'd have to agree that there are other variables that would counter your at least preliminary conclusions. For example, maybe the Republicans, those low propensity voters that the Republicans went after in order to outvote the Dems, outvoted the Dems and came out in huge numbers. And that was the differential, and that made the difference in the swing states and elsewhere. That simple piece alone would counter what you say is algorithmic oddity.
Manipulation.
Manipulation, forgive me.
That's an excellent point.
Tell me your answer to that.
Point, right, is if turnout was effective. I don't know if you have the slides that reference this, but we actually mapped the early voting in Clark County to Las Vegas, and we looked at where these polling centers were and the turnout and how each party performed at these polling locations.
Is it a graph, or is it a? I'm trying to.
It is a map, very simple map with some overlay. It may have been included. If it is, it's an excellent point. If it isn't, I can talk through it.
All right, I'm trying to look for it, but go ahead.
Okay. But what we did, as I said, is Clark County, Nevada specifically, they don't poll, or they don't vote by precinct. You can go pretty much anywhere to one of these polling centers, early voting or election day, and they'll map your vote back, and it gets added up. And what we found, as you mentioned, right, is if the Republicans turned out in huge numbers, well, there's 2 trends that are strange. One is, generally, as you said, the rural areas, those are where you're going to see those Republicans really turn out. You can still see them in some of the more populated areas.
Is this it here?
Okay.
Hold up. Is it the one that says Clark County binning by vote?
Early voting map?
That's not it, right?
This is another example of what we're seeing, but
okay, keep talking. Keep talking through, and I'll try to find that map. Go ahead.
No worries if you can't find it. But to answer your question very distinctly, we mapped those locations for early voting. We mapped the machines and the amount of votes those machines got. And Clark County specifically is a very liberal, very left-leaning location. And Las Vegas, specifically the actual
let's
city
see.
area,
is this it right here? Nathan is.
Location by location. And we compared the voting demographic, the registered voters in those areas. We looked at people are registered by precinct, but they don't vote by precinct. So we looked at those precincts. We looked at what the percentage of Democrat to Republican is. And it is heavily in Democrat favor. It's nonpartisan and Democratic in Las Vegas. And yet we're seeing polling locations that the Republicans were leading by over 5,000 votes in some cases. And so it's strange to see that there is no heavy red stronghold in the middle of Las Vegas. But we're seeing the early voting polling locations show that when we look at the data. And so
yeah, but you yourself said,
concerns us.
You yourself said that in the state of Nevada that they don't vote by precinct. You can go anywhere and vote. And it's possible that red voters or GOP voters went to urban centers in Nevada or high Democratic output and voted. I think your analysis is valuable. I do. And it's interesting. I guess what begs the question is, if everything you say is right regarding the algorithms and stuff, and you say this is how it could happen, voter manipulation, then what's next? What do you do with this data?
All right, I want to stop right there. Okay, think about it. You as a voter. Now, in your neighborhood where you live, you either live in a heavily red county or heavily, and this is in any state, or heavily blue county, right? Like in my precinct where I live in a zip code that is blue. It's pretty much blue. There's not, even at the voting precincts, when they have the volunteers, there is way more Democratic volunteers there because there's not a lot of Republicans that come to vote in my precinct. So what he was trying to say was Las Vegas is heavily blue. So I guess the question is, so you mean to tell me that all these rural people who are traditionally red voters, because, you know, in Nevada they can vote anywhere they wanted to, drove all the way to Las Vegas precincts to vote when they had their own precincts in their own area? They can vote anywhere they want to, but it's showing a large amount of red voters in Las Vegas area, which made no sense. In the heavily blue, that doesn't make any sense when they tried to map it back. Why is that? And he says that, well, maybe they just came. I can't buy that. Let's go on.
How does it work for us? How does it help us? And how does it maybe in the future fix kind of what the issues are you're raising?
Yeah, excellent point. The reason why we want to kind of bring this to light and we want these questions is we want audits. It's never too late to conduct a audit or an investigation.
Yeah.
Obviously, the election is certified. The election is over. That's perfectly fine. But there is far more benefit in conducting audits and looking at the paper ballots and comparing them to the results, not just in Clark County, but in any of the swing states and even in other states. And so, as I said before, we want to validate the election. That's what my job has been since election night, is we want to make sure that our machines are safe. We want to make sure that people are asking these questions because it benefits everyone that we validate, and it doesn't hurt anyone. And we do an audit, right? We go to Nevada, we go to Clark County, we say, hey, let's audit let's audit all three types. And we find no discrepancies and no issues. The paper trail matches the reported votes. That's perfect. And we hold that up and we say, our elections are free and fair. This was just a discrepancy. And we can figure out why that is. As you said, maybe this was a historic moment and there was a lot of momentum and people came out to vote in unique ways. But realistically, unless you validate and you check, it hurts us all. And so that's why we want accountability and we want audits. And we are willing to pay for them as well. I've reached out to a couple different organizations and entities to help us, push for those.
Mustafa?
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing this information. My dad was big into mathematics, probabilities, statistics. So this is helpful. I'm curious. We've got this dismantling of the election security efforts that are going on right now. How does that impede the work that you're doing? I mean, see what's going on with the FBI and the task force that's there, the DOJ, FEC, EAC, all these different folks are supposed to play a role. As we move toward midterms, of course, we've got to get this right, make sure that there's, no funny business, I'll say it that way. So I'm just curious about the steps you think we should take and how, these changes that we're seeing inside of the federal government might play a role.
It's very concerning to see the dismantling of these organizations that should be safeguarding our elections, that is a concern, because what benefit is there to, destabilizing our election systems, if not to make it easier to manipulate them?
And that's a great point. Didn't dear Donald Trump say that the election was stolen? So why are they wanting to dismantle it now? Strange, don't you think? Seems like they would keep that agency around, considering that the election was stolen from him in 2016, so he says, right? Y'all says this is just funny business. Oh, this is funny business.
That is a concern. And I think, as you said, kind of going forward, this is why I helped found the Election Truth Alliance. It's because no one else was doing this work. No one else was actually looking into the numbers, holding up the data and saying, this looks weird, we should dig deeper. And that should have been the federal government. That should have been these agencies, but they've not been doing it even before they were being dismantled. And that's a concern as well. And so kind of going forward, as I said, we honestly just need to demand audits for both our local and state election officials. They can do it. They have the power. Your attorney generals and your secretaries of state, they could do an audit, and it, as I said, just be safeguarding. If for some reason we do audits and we do find discrepancies, that brings to light a lot of concerns, and it brings up the issue. And people ask me, why should we care about this now? All right, the election's over. Why should we care? And the problem is, if we don't validate this, and there was manipulation to the extent that we say could have potentially happened, that the data is indicating, that means there is no midterms. There is no next time. There is no, election 2016. Because if you can manipulate an election, you choose the winner. And, there's no coming back from that. He who counts the vote.
Hey guys, Grant Cardone here.
All right, so I'm going to stop it right there with them. I think we got the point of what this guy who's with this election agency that has been doing all this audit. And I think that it's important that we know what he's doing. So here, let's just look at the key findings of his audit as to what he found. All right, so his key findings. Okay, using the cast vote record CVR data for Clark County, the Election Truth Alliance, ETA, that's what Brother Nathan here that just spoke to us is from, has identified voting patterns, anomalies suggestive of election interference. Our analysis observes an unusual phenomena in early voting results, not present in election day voting or mail-in voting results. So the number one thing is drop-off difference. The term we talked about drop-off. The term drop-off refers to votes cast for a presidential candidate versus the votes cast for a down-ballot candidate at the same party. In Clark County, as that was the case, the swing states in the 2024 U.S. presidential election, there is a significant difference between Trump's drop-off rate and Harris's drop-off rate when comparing the presidential race to the Senate. So maybe Democrats wanted to just vote for the president too. Why didn't that happen on our side? That's the question. I may have just went in and voted for the president and that's it. But it didn't happen as rampant as it did on the Republican side. Key number one. Number two, increased volume of votes linked to greater discrepancies. The greater number of ballots cast and processed in early voting, the more precincts the pattern becomes. Trump consistently received closer to 60% of the votes, while Harris consistently, that's the key word, receives closer to 40% of the votes. There appears to be a correlation between this pattern and the tabulators that process a higher volume of ballots. Why uniquely 60% every time? Makes no sense. All right. And then there's abnormal clustering. In contrast to election day voting, early vote results reflect an unusual pattern. Tabulators that process more than approximately 250 ballots show a high degree of clustering and unusual uniformity, causing a visual shift when the data is presented as a scattered chart. This is a departure from expected human voting behavior. So whomever did this, guys, they tried to make it clean, make it look clean, and it just doesn't look clean, because you can go through every voter pattern and there's a bell curve. If any of you know a thing about bell curve and doing charts and graph, but this thing is off. It is off. So this guy and his team have done a great job of showing us something went wrong in this election. I mean, nothing we can do about it now. Election is free and it's certified and the whole bit. But we need to make sure that we do audits going forward, because as I showed you in the earlier video, Russia wanted Trump to win. They tried their darndest to put stuff out there to skew the vote. The Russian bell curve, that bell tail was that Russian tail. The Russian tail, is a type of voting manipulation that occurred in Russia. Why is it showing up in America? All right. Think about all this stuff. All right. So now I'm going to get real crazy and say some stuff that I don't know if it's true, but I'm just going to say it. So we always want to know, what is it that Putin has on Trump that makes him want to give away poor Zelensky? And he was in his pocket way before this, so we can say that too. But something is huge. Something is huge that has Donald Trump basically giving the United States and becoming partners in bed with Putin. We don't know what it is, but whatever it is, it's huge. And we may not ever find out. But I tell you what, if Russia has anything to do with what happened here, and they do a deep dive into this, and we find that out, then we'll know something is going on. But like I tell you guys, everything in the dark will come to light. Trust me, it will. So again, I just wanted to present this to you because this was recently done on Roland's show, and I'm glad he invited the guy. But because how many of you, let's just talk about it, on election night, were you dumbfounded as much as I was? Granted, I was afraid people wouldn't vote for a black woman. That's just us being black people. But what about white women for Trump and white women for Harris and white men for... All these groups were polarized. The rallies were huge. Trump's rallies were dropping off. And then he wins these big numbers like this. I expected it, if he won, it would be really close, but not like this. Do you see what I'm saying? And then you had the poor little psychics, and this is just the funny part. The poor little psychics were going out of their mind because it was like, something is wrong. They couldn't handle it. And they were still out there going, something is wrong. And they knew it. Even dear Alan Lichtman, whose his little method always works, it didn't even work. Nothing worked. I mean, even Pluff, who was the Democratic, he was in the campaign, who did Obama's campaign, who had a wonderful ground game. Now they're saying the ground game is nothing anymore. Nothing. So everybody was dumbfounded. And it's starting to make more sense to me now. You know, nothing I can do about it. Nothing we can do about it, guys. But I'm kind of upset with Kamala and the whole campaign because all of these guys, including Nathan there, wrote a letter to the Harris campaign on November 23rd. I will put that letter in this podcast as a link to, urging them to do an audit. Yep, they did. They urged them to do an audit because they had found activity that did not look right. Did they do anything with it? What did they do with it? I mean, that's a question. I mean, they got it to them. Did they do anything with it? I don't know. But it makes me upset if they just looked at it and thought, Democrats, we always got to do the right thing. And I know we were on this trips of this tour of making sure that we certified the election. Everybody showed up to the inauguration. Peaceful transfer of power. We had to do all the stuff right. But this is wrong if it happened. This is wrong if it happened. So Democrats, we don't always got to be all prim and proper and pent up. Some of y'all need to be just as gangster as these guys are. And the way that they turn up our government, guys, I tell you, all of this could have been stopped. If this voting thing, I mean, maybe we had no chance, period. Who knows? Unless we could have overwhelmingly came out and this little, whatever they did would not have mattered. But I don't know. So when I saw this on Roland Martin, I said, how did I miss this? How did I miss this analysis of the voting? I don't know how. But I'm convinced that those guys know what they're doing. And I know about bell curves and graphs and how things work. And that's how they run companies. Now, a person that runs a company who expects certain things to go some kind of way, they would look at that graph and say, yeah, something's fishy. They would know. Okay? All these math minds would know something fishy happened. All right, so I decided to go ahead and do this podcast. I was skeptical about doing it at first because I don't want to be out there talking like conspiracy theorists and people thinking that we're all upset because we lost the election. At this point, guys, this is not a Democrat or Republican thing. This is an American people thing. And all of us who Republicans, drop the red, blue, drop the blue. This is a fight as Americans as to what's happening to us. I was listening to the Senator Albrecht, the new senator from Maryland, and Jake Tapper was telling her that Jake Tapper from CNN was telling her that the Democratic polls, the new whatever poll that's out, Gallup, I don't know whichever one, Ipsos poll showing the Democrats' approval rating was 20%. We don't care about all of that right now. Donald Trump is tearing up our government, is what she basically told him. She pushed back. She should have said, and you too, Jake, all of the journalists, everybody needs to fight this thing. Because what you have in office with the cowardly Republicans who are afraid to speak up, but they will speak up behind closed doors, but they won't speak up in person, they're cowards. And they're not going to come to your rescue. So it's up to the American people to make the noise. Just like you did at J.D. Vance when he came to Vermont to ski. You're going to have to keep doing it. And unfortunately, the black people have kind of retreated a bit. But it's time for everybody to mobilize. And I'm glad that my white brothers and sisters are seeing what it means to be out there and protest. Because y'all don't do a lot of this. We've done it all our lives. So now you get a chance to feel what it feels like to protest for your country, for your rights. Because there's a lot of wrong stuff that's going on. Believe me, if you want to. Or just wait and see. Or as the word is out there now, FAFO. All right? So guys, be sure and look at, in this podcast, there's a link in this podcast of the official study that these guys did on the election, and you read it for yourself. I'm also going to put the letter in there that they wrote to the Harris campaign on November 23rd, I believe, about what was going on and what their findings were. And you make your own decision and your determination of what's going on here and see if it makes any sense to you. Why would, I'm going to say this one last thing, why would the voting patterns of early voting only in the swing states be different from the rest of the country? Why? Does that make sense? I mean, Michigan is Michigan and all the swing states are swing states, but they're not different from Americans. Kamala made some great traction in some of those swing states. But the way that they made it look like she made no effect whatsoever. And I don't believe that. I never have. All right. So there you have it. I know this is a lot to unpack, but this is my podcast for today. And I thank you so much for joining me. And be sure and follow me on this podcast, guys. I'm having a blast sending the truth to you guys. And if you have any questions, all my socials are there. Shoot me a line. Drop a comment. And let's talk and see what we can do to mobilize to get our country back on track. So you have a wonderful day. And let's keep talking. This is your boy, Corley Long. Have a wonderful day. Bye.